Every Monday and Thursday evening for the past 19 years, I have driven my old 1962 Chevrolet pickup along the winding mountain road, parked at the same weathered pullout near the old fire tower, and walked the familiar three-quarter-mile path to leave food at the massive hollow oak that stands at the edge of the deep woods. My husband thinks I am feeding the wild turkeys that roam these hills. My neighbors assume I am some kind of eccentric nature lover with too much time on her hands. The truth is something far more extraordinary, something that most people would never believe even if I swore on a stack of Bibles. I've been leaving food for the same creature since 1953, a being that exists in legend and campfire tales, but whom I know to be as real as the ancient mountains that surround my home. My name is Eleanor Whitmore, and I am 55 years old. I have spent most of my adult life working as a forestry surveyor in these Appalachian mountains of West Virginia. First as a young field assistant fresh out of college, then as a senior surveyor, and now in my semi-retirement as a consultant for the State Parks Department. These forests are woven into my very soul. I was born within sight of these ridges, raised in a cabin not 5 miles from where I now live, and I expect I will die with the smell of pine and hemlock in my nostrils. But it was not until the autumn of 1953 that I truly understood I was not alone in these ancient hollows. That something else called these misty mountains home, something remarkable and deserving of protection, something that would change my life forever. That Monday evening in October of 1972 was cool and still, with the first hints of autumn color touching the highest ridges, the kind of evening that makes you stop and simply breathe in the beauty of the world. I loaded the bed of my old truck with the usual supplies: a canvas bag containing fresh pears from my small orchard, smoked ham from the pig we had butchered last fall, a large jar of blackberry preserves I had put up in August, and a fresh loaf of cornbread I had baked that very morning. Simple things, humble offerings, but ones I knew would be received with appreciation. The drive up the mountain road took nearly half an hour, my truck groaning over the rough gravel and exposed roots that made up what passed for a road in these parts. I passed the ruins of the old Whitmore Coal Company operation, my grandfather's enterprise, abandoned now for nearly 15 years since the seams had played out and the bigger companies had moved their operations further south. The forests here were slowly healing, young oaks and maples and tulip poplars reclaiming the scarred hillsides that had been stripped bare in my grandmother's time. I parked in my usual spot, a small clearing where an old logging skid had once been, and shouldered my pack. The evening air smelled of leaf mold and wood smoke from some distant cabin, and somewhere down in the hollow, a barred owl was already beginning its evening calls. I had walked this trail so many times, I could navigate it in complete darkness, past the massive boulder we called Preacher's Rock, down through the rhododendron thicket that grew so dense it blocked out the sky, across the little creek that ran cold and clear over smooth stones, and finally up the gentle slope to where the ancient oak stood like a sentinel at the edge of the deep wilderness. The oak was easily 400 years old, perhaps older. Its trunk was so massive that 3 grown adults could not have joined hands around it. Lightning had struck it sometime in the distant past, hollowing out the center and creating a natural shelter that was perfect for my purposes. Protected from the frequent mountain rains, hidden from the occasional hiker who ventured this far from the marked trails, and positioned at the very edge of territory I had come to recognize as hers. I unpacked my offerings carefully, arranging them in the hollow space as I had done hundreds of times before. Then I stepped back, looked around at the familiar forest now growing dim in the fading light, and allowed my mind to drift back to the first time I had come to this place. 19 years and another lifetime ago, autumn of 1953. I was 36 years old then, a senior forestry surveyor working a section of old-growth forest about 3 miles from where I now stood. It was late October, and we had already had our first hard frost. The leaves were falling fast, carpeting the ground in shades of gold and crimson and brown, and the air had that crisp edge that told you winter was not far behind. I was working alone that day, conducting a timber survey for a proposed selective harvest. My job was to mark the trees that could be taken without damaging the forest's overall health, to map the terrain, and to note any features that should be preserved. It was solitary work, quiet work, and I preferred it that way. There was something pure about being alone in the forest, with nothing but my thoughts and the sounds of nature for company. I had just finished measuring and marking a cluster of large white oaks when I heard it. A deep, resonant call that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once, echoing off the rocky outcrops and filtering through the dense canopy. It was unlike any animal sound I had ever encountered in all my years in these mountains. Not a bear, not a bobcat, not an elk. It had a quality that made something ancient and primal stir in my chest. A recognition of something powerful and unknown that bypassed my rational mind entirely and spoke directly to instincts I did not know I possessed. I stood perfectly still, my pencil frozen above my survey notebook, listening. The call came again, closer this time, from somewhere in the dense laurel thicket to the east. My first instinct was to head back to the road, to my truck and safety, but something held me in place. Curiosity, perhaps, or something deeper. I had spent my entire adult life in these woods, and had never heard anything like that sound. If I walked away now, I knew I would wonder about it for the rest of my days. I moved quietly through the fallen leaves, stepping carefully to minimize the crunching sounds, following game trails when I could, and pushing through thick vegetation when I had to. After about 20 minutes, I found tracks. They were pressed deep into the soft earth near a small spring, and the shape made my breath catch in my throat. Footprints easily 17 inches long, with 5 distinct toes, clearly visible in the mud. They were deep, suggesting something of considerable weight and spaced far apart, indicating a stride much longer than any human could manage. I followed the tracks for another 15 minutes, my heart pounding so loud in my ears I was certain anything within a mile could hear it. The trail led me to a small clearing on a south-facing slope, sheltered from the wind by a rocky outcrop. And there, partially hidden in the deep shadows beneath a massive hemlock, I saw her for the first time. She was enormous. I estimated at least 7.5 feet tall, possibly more. Her body was covered in dark reddish-brown hair, longer and thicker around her shoulders and the top of her head, where it almost looked like a wild mane. She was facing partially away from me, crouched down, beside what I realized was a recently killed deer, a young doe that had probably been weakened by disease or injury, but she was not eating. Instead, she seemed to be examining the carcass carefully, methodically, in a way that suggested intelligence and purpose. I watched, barely breathing, afraid that any movement would alert her to my presence. Her hands, and they were clearly hands despite their size, moved with surprising delicacy as she worked. And then she made a sound, a lower, softer version of the call I had heard before. Within moments, 2 smaller figures emerged from behind the rocky outcrop. They were juveniles, I realized, maybe 4 feet tall, moving with the awkward energy of youth. Her offspring, and suddenly the entire scene made perfect sense. She was a mother, teaching her young how to process food, how to survive in the wild. The female made another sound, and the juveniles approached the deer carcass. She guided them with gestures and vocalizations, showing them something, perhaps what parts were safe to eat, perhaps how to efficiently butcher the animal. I could not be certain of the specifics, but it was clearly instruction, clearly teaching. This was not simple animal behavior. This was something far more sophisticated, far more human. I must have made some small sound. Perhaps my boot slipped on a loose stone. Perhaps I simply gasped without realizing it, because suddenly the adult female's head snapped in my direction. For a moment that seemed to stretch into eternity, we made eye contact across the clearing. Her eyes were dark, deeply intelligent, and filled with an awareness that made something fundamental shift inside me. She did not charge, did not roar or display aggression. Instead, she gathered her young with a gesture that was unmistakably protective and loving, and they moved quickly but calmly into the forest, disappearing within seconds as if they had never been there at all. I stood there for a very long time after they had vanished, trying to process what I had witnessed, trying to reconcile the evidence of my own eyes with everything I had been taught about what was and was not possible in this world. That evening, back at my small cabin, I said nothing to my husband Robert about what I had seen. What could I say? That I had encountered Bigfoot, that I had watched a Sasquatch mother teaching her children. He would have thought I had lost my mind, or that I had been sampling the moonshine that still flowed freely in these hills despite being technically illegal. But I could not stop thinking about that family, because that is exactly what they were, a family, a mother with children struggling to survive and raise her young just as any human mother would. The next morning, I packed extra food in my survey bag, leftover biscuits, some dried apple slices, a piece of salt pork. During my lunch break, I hiked back to that clearing and left the food near where I had seen them. I had no idea if they would take it. I did not even know if they would find it or if some other animal would get to it first. But I felt compelled to try. Something about the intelligence in that mother's eyes had spoken to me, had created a connection that I could not ignore. 3 days later, I returned to the clearing. The food was gone, and there were fresh tracks in the soft earth around where I had left it. Tracks that matched the ones I had followed before. So I left more food, and more the following week, and the week after that. The present day, October 1972. Standing at the old hollow oak, I smiled at the memory of those early days, when I had no idea what I was beginning, when I could never have imagined where that simple act of leaving food would lead. That autumn of 1953 had been the start of something extraordinary, a relationship that had now spanned nearly 2 decades, built on nothing more than regular offerings, patient observation, and mutual respect. Over the years, I had learned her patterns, her preferences, her routines. She preferred fruits and preserves to meat, though she would take smoked ham or bacon when offered. She seemed to have a particular fondness for anything sweet. She was cautious and deliberate, never approaching the offering site while I was anywhere nearby. In the early years, I never saw her at all during my visits. I would simply leave the food and find it gone when I returned. But over time, that changed. I would catch glimpses of her in the distance, watching me from the shadows. Then she began to show herself more openly, always from a safe distance, always ready to disappear into the forest at the first sign of anything threatening. The first time she allowed me to see her clearly, without immediately retreating, was in the spring of 1958, almost 5 years after our first encounter. I had arrived at the oak tree to find her standing at the edge of the clearing, not hiding, not running, just watching me with those intelligent, assessing eyes. We stood there for perhaps 5 minutes, neither of us moving, neither of us looking away. Then she made a gesture that I interpreted as greeting, touching her chest and then extending her hand toward me. I returned the gesture instinctively, touching my own chest and extending my hand. She made a low vocalization, almost like a hum of satisfaction, and then melted back into the forest. It felt like we had crossed some invisible threshold, established some basic protocol of acknowledgement. From that day forward, our interactions became more regular, more sustained. By 1960, I had learned that she was not alone. There was an entire community of them living in these deep woods, perhaps a dozen individuals that I had confirmed through tracks and occasional sightings. She seemed to be the leader of the group, the decision maker, the one who determined what was safe and what was dangerous. The two juveniles I had seen that first day had grown into young adults, and there were others, including what appeared to be an elderly male with almost entirely grey hair who moved slowly and carefully, and another adult female who seemed to be pregnant. I gave them names in my own mind, names that helped me keep track of them and remember their individual characteristics. The leader I called Tara, the old male I called Grandfather, the pregnant female I called Hope. The two young adults from that first sighting I called Dawn and Dusk, because one had lighter coloring and one had darker. By 1965, my Monday and Thursday visits had become as fixed a part of my routine as eating breakfast or brushing my teeth. Robert had long since stopped asking questions about my regular trips up the mountain, accepting my vague explanations about checking on the forest, monitoring wildlife, maintaining my survey markers. He was a good man, patient and understanding, even when he did not fully comprehend what I was doing. Perhaps he suspected something of the truth. Perhaps he had noticed that I always came back from these trips with a particular light in my eyes, a peacefulness that ordinary forest walks could not explain. But if he knew or guessed, he never pressed me about it. The community had grown in those years. I had counted at least 15 individuals by 1965, including several new babies. Tara had given birth to another offspring, a daughter I named Star because she had a distinctive patch of lighter fur on her chest. The group had established clear patterns of behavior, moving through their territory in predictable cycles, denning in different locations depending on the season, gathering at certain spots for what appeared to be social interactions. I documented everything I observed in a private journal that I kept hidden in a locked box in my workshop, pages and pages of notes and sketches that recorded 19 years of careful observation. I never told anyone about my research, never published anything, never sought recognition or validation. The relationship I had built was too precious, too fragile to risk exposing to the world. I had seen what happened when people claimed to have encountered these creatures. They were ridiculed, mocked, dismissed as hoaxers or lunatics. I had no interest in subjecting myself to that treatment, and more importantly, I had no intention of bringing any attention to this community that could put them at risk. In the autumn of 1967, something changed in our relationship. I arrived at the Hollow Oak one Monday evening to find Tara waiting for me, not at the edge of the clearing as she sometimes did, but right beside the tree, close enough that I could have reached out and touched her. She was holding something in her massive hand, and as I approached, she extended it toward me. It was a small carving, a piece of wood that had been shaped and smoothed into a recognizable form. A human figure, simple but unmistakable, with arms extended in the gesture we had come to use as greeting. She had made this. She had created art, a representation of me, and she was giving it to me as a gift. I accepted it with trembling hands, overwhelmed by what this meant. This was not the behavior of an animal. This was the action of a person, a being capable of abstract thought, symbolic representation, and deliberate gift-giving. "Thank you," I said, though I did not know if she could understand my words. "Thank you for this. I will treasure it always." She made a low sound that I had come to recognize as contentment or satisfaction. Then she touched her chest and made a vocalization that sounded something like her name. "Tara," she said, or something close to it. She was telling me her name, not the name I had given her in my mind, but her real name, the one her own people used. I repeated it back to her as best I could. Tara. She made the contentment sound again, and then she made another vocalization pointing at me. She wanted to know my name. "Eleanor," I said, touching my own chest. "My name is Eleanor." She tried to repeat it, producing something that sounded like Elnor. Close enough. From that day forward, I was Elnor to her and her people. We had exchanged names, crossed another threshold in our relationship. I was no longer just the strange human who left food. I was a person with an identity, someone worth knowing. The winter of 1967 to 68 was brutal. Snow fell early and stayed late, burying the mountains under drifts that reached past my windows. Temperatures dropped and stayed well below freezing for weeks at a time. I increased my visits to 3 times a week, hauling larger quantities of food up the mountain through snow that sometimes came up to my waist. I worried constantly about the community, about whether they were finding enough to eat, whether the old male I called grandfather would survive the cold, whether the babies born that summer were warm enough in whatever shelter their mothers had found. On one particularly bitter January evening, I arrived at the Hollow Oak to find Tara waiting for me with her entire family group. They were thin, all of them, their ribs showing through their thick fur coats. The winter had been hard on them. I unpacked everything I had brought, twice my usual amount, and watched as they ate with a restraint that touched me deeply. Even in their obvious hunger, they were careful and deliberate, making sure the young ones and the elderly ate first, taking only what they needed. That evening, Tara did something she had never done before. She approached me closely, close enough that I could smell the wild, musky scent of her fur, close enough that I could see the individual hairs around her face moving in my breath. She reached out slowly, giving me every opportunity to pull back, and placed her massive hand on my shoulder. The weight of it was substantial, the warmth surprising. Her eyes met mine, and in them I saw something that transcended species, transcended the differences between us: gratitude, recognition, connection. The years that followed deepened our relationship in ways I never could have predicted. By 1970, Tara trusted me enough to introduce me to the entire community. I met all 15 members, learned their individual personalities, their relationships with each other, their roles within the group. The old male, whose real name sounded something like Konga, was indeed the patriarch, the repository of wisdom and experience for the community. He was Tara's father, I eventually realized, which made her the community's leader by birthright as well as by strength and intelligence. The other adult female, the one I had called Hope, was Tara's sister, named something like Kina. She had 2 children of her own now, sturdy youngsters who were learning to forage and hunt under their mother's watchful guidance. The community had a complex social structure that I came to understand over years of observation. Tara was the undisputed leader, making decisions about where the group would travel, when they would move to new territory, how they would respond to potential threats. Konga served as an advisor, a voice of experience and caution that Tara clearly respected. The other adults all had their roles to play, some as hunters, some as caregivers for the young, some as scouts who ranged ahead to check for danger. The juveniles were expected to learn and contribute as they grew, gradually taking on more responsibility until they were ready to either establish their own place in the community or, in the case of males, potentially leave to find mates elsewhere. It was a society as complex and organized as any human community, governed by rules and traditions that had probably been passed down for countless generations. I learned other things as well in those years. I learned that they had a language, not just the vocalizations I had heard, but also an elaborate system of gestures and facial expressions that conveyed complex meanings. I learned that they made tools, simple ones like digging sticks and carrying containers woven from bark, but tools nonetheless. I learned that they practiced medicine of a sort, using certain plants and herbs to treat injuries and illnesses. I learned that they buried their dead, conducting something that could only be described as funeral ceremonies, with vocalizations that sounded like mourning and offerings of food and objects placed with the body. They were not animals, they were people, different from us in many ways, but people nonetheless. Intelligent, emotional, social beings with culture and tradition and the capacity for love and grief. The autumn of 1971 brought a crisis that would test everything I had built with Tara and her community. It began on a Monday evening in early October. I arrived at the Hollow Oak to find Tara waiting for me, but not in her usual calm manner. She was agitated, pacing back and forth at the edge of the clearing, making sounds I had never heard before. Distress calls, I realized. Something was very wrong. She approached me urgently, gesturing for me to follow. This was unprecedented. In all our years of interaction, she had never asked me to come into their territory, into the deep forest where they made their home. The boundary had always been the Hollow Oak, a neutral meeting place where we could interact without me intruding on their private space. But now, she was clearly asking me to cross that boundary. Something was wrong enough that she was willing to break the established rules. I followed her without hesitation. She led me deep into the forest, through terrain I had never traversed, despite all my years in these woods. We traveled for perhaps an hour, climbing over ridges and descending into hollows, pushing through rhododendron thickets, so dense they blocked out the fading evening light. Finally, we emerged into a hidden valley I had never known existed, a sanctuary surrounded by rocky cliffs on 3 sides and accessible only through the narrow passage we had just traveled. This was their home, their base, the center of their territory. The entire community was gathered in the valley, arranged in a loose circle around a natural shelter formed by an overhanging rock ledge. The atmosphere was heavy with tension and grief. As I approached, guided by Tara's hand on my shoulder, the circle parted to let me through, and then I saw what had caused such distress. Kina was there, huddled at the back of the shelter, holding a small bundle in her arms. It was her newest baby, born just that summer. A tiny creature I had only seen from a distance during previous visits, but something was clearly wrong. The baby was limp, making weak sounds of distress, and even in the dim light I could see that her movements were sluggish, uncoordinated. Kina looked up at me with eyes full of desperate hope, and I understood immediately why Tara had brought me here. They knew I was different from them. They knew I had access to things they did not. They were hoping I could help. I approached slowly, carefully, not wanting to frighten Kina or add to her distress. The other members of the community watched silently, their eyes following my every movement. This was either going to be a breakthrough or a disaster. If I could help, I would cement my relationship with them in a way that could never be undone. If I failed, or if I did something that hurt the baby, I might lose everything I had built over nearly 2 decades. "May I see her?" I asked, not knowing if Kina would understand my words, but hoping my tone would convey my intentions. "May I look at the baby?" Tara made a sound, something directed at her sister. Kina hesitated, then slowly, reluctantly, extended the baby toward me. The infant was tiny, perhaps 15 pounds, covered in soft fur that was matted with sweat. Her eyes were half closed, her breathing rapid and shallow. When I gently touched her forehead, the heat radiating from her small body told me immediately what was wrong. "She has a fever," I said. "She is sick. I need to find out what is wrong." I examined the baby as carefully as I could, acutely aware that every eye in the community was watching me. Her ears looked clean, no sign of infection there. Her throat was not swollen or red. Her belly seemed normal when I gently palpated it, but when I checked her mouth, I found it. A small tooth was emerging from her gum, surrounded by red, inflamed tissue that had clearly become infected. Teething. The baby was teething, and the gum had become infected, causing a fever that could be dangerous if left untreated. "I understand," I said, more to myself than to anyone else. "I know what is wrong, but I need medicine. I need to come back with medicine." I tried to explain to Tara, using gestures and simple words. I made the motion of leaving and returning. I pointed at the baby and mimed giving her something. I did not know how much she understood, but she seemed to grasp that I needed to leave and come back with something that could help. She made a sound of acknowledgement and gestured for one of the younger adults to escort me back to the boundary of their territory. I do not think I have ever driven as fast as I did that night, racing down the mountain road with my headlights cutting through the darkness. My mind spinning through possibilities. The baby needed antibiotics, something to fight the infection, but I could not simply walk into a pharmacy and request medicine for what I would have to describe as a very large, very hairy infant. I needed to think of another approach. Robert was asleep when I got home, and I did not wake him. Instead, I went to the small barn where we kept our few livestock and found what I was looking for. A bottle of veterinary penicillin that I kept on hand for treating sick animals. It was not ideal, but it would work. I calculated a dosage appropriate for the baby's estimated weight, measured it out into a small bottle, and added a jar of honey to help make the medicine more palatable. The next morning, I told Robert I had to go back up the mountain urgently, that I had found signs of a sick animal that needed help. He accepted this explanation without question, as he always did. Within an hour, I was hiking back up the trail, my pack heavy with the medicine and additional supplies. Tara was waiting for me at the hollow oak, and together we made the journey back to the hidden valley. The baby had worsened overnight. Her fever was higher, her cries weaker. Keena was frantic, holding her daughter tightly, clearly afraid to let anyone near. Tara had to coax her sister for several minutes before Keena would allow me to approach again. I mixed the penicillin with honey, creating a sweet mixture that I hoped the baby would accept. Then, with Keena supporting the baby's head, I carefully administered the medicine, using a smooth stick as a primitive spoon to get the mixture into the baby's mouth. The waiting that followed was the longest of my life. I stayed in the valley for hours, watching over the sick infant, checking her temperature by touch, administering additional doses of the medicine at regular intervals. The community remained gathered around us, a silent vigil of hope and anxiety. Kongar, the old patriarch, came to sit beside me at one point, his massive presence somehow comforting. He made a low sound that I interpreted as encouragement or gratitude, and he stayed there until the sun began to set. By the second day, the baby's fever began to break. By the third day, she was nursing again, her cries stronger, her movements more energetic. By the end of the week, she was clearly on the road to recovery, her gum healing, her temperature normal, her spirit returning. I had done it. I had saved her. The community's response to the baby's recovery was unlike anything I had ever experienced. They gathered around me, all 15 of them, making sounds of joy and relief. Several of the younger adults performed what could only be described as a celebration dance, leaping and spinning with abandon. Kongar approached me and made the greeting gesture, then added something new, touching his chest and then touching mine. I understood. He was acknowledging a bond between us, a connection that went beyond simple gratitude. Keena brought the baby to me. She was healthy now, alert and curious, reaching out with tiny hands to touch my face. Keena made a sound, a name. Luna, she said, or something close to it. The baby's name. Luna, I repeated. Hello, Luna. You gave us quite a scare, little one. Keena made another sound, and then she did something that brought tears to my eyes. She took my hand and placed it on Luna's chest, over her heart. Then she made the greeting gesture and added the same touch that Konga had made, the touch that meant bond, connection, family. She was acknowledging me as part of Luna's extended family. She was thanking me in the most profound way her people knew. The months that followed the crisis deepened my relationship with the community in ways I never could have anticipated. My Monday and Thursday visits continued, but now they often extended into the hidden valley itself. Tara and her people had accepted me fully, welcoming me into their private sanctuary, showing me aspects of their lives that no human had likely ever witnessed. I observed their daily routines, their social interactions, their methods of communication and problem solving. I watched the young ones learn from their elders, saw the complex relationships between individuals, witnessed moments of tenderness and humor and conflict that revealed the full range of emotional life within the community. Luna grew quickly in the months after her illness, transforming from a fragile infant into a robust and energetic toddler. She had a particular fondness for me, always seeking me out when I visited, climbing on me with the fearless confidence of the very young. Her mother, Keena, watched these interactions with a tolerance that suggested deep trust. I had saved her daughter's life. That created a bond that transcended the differences between our species. Robert eventually noticed the changes in my routine, the longer visits, the greater quantities of food I was taking up the mountain. One evening, as I was preparing for my Thursday trip, he finally asked the question he had been holding back for years. "Eleanor," he said, sitting down at the kitchen table with the expression of a man who has decided to confront something he has been avoiding, "what is really going on up there? You have been making these trips for nearly 20 years. I have never questioned it because I trust you, but I think I deserve to know the truth." I sat down across from him, looking at the man I had been married to for 32 years, the father of our grown children, my partner in every aspect of life, except this one secret I had kept hidden. I thought about lying, making up some story about a research project or a conservation effort, but I could not. Robert deserved the truth, and perhaps I was tired of carrying this secret alone. I told him everything. The first encounter in 1953, the years of leaving food, the slow building of trust, Tara and her people, Luna's illness and recovery, all of it. I talked for nearly 2 hours while he listened without interruption, his face cycling through expressions of disbelief, wonder, concern, and finally something that looked like acceptance. When I finished, he was quiet for a long time. Then he asked the question I had been dreading. "Why did you never tell me before?" "I was afraid," I admitted. "Afraid you would think I was crazy. Afraid you would want to tell someone, alert the authorities, bring scientists and reporters. I was afraid of anything that might put them at risk." He reached across the table and took my hand. "Eleanor," he said, "I have been married to you for over 30 years. I know you. You are the most rational, level-headed person I have ever met. If you say these creatures exist, if you say you have been building a relationship with them for nearly 20 years, then I believe you. And I would never do anything to put that at risk." The relief that washed over me was overwhelming. I had carried this secret for so long, hidden it from the person closest to me, and now that burden was lifted. Robert had questions, of course, hundreds of questions, and over the following weeks I answered all of them. I showed him my journal, my notes, the small carved figure that Tara had given me. I did not take him to meet the community. Not yet, perhaps not ever, but I shared everything else with him. And having someone to share it with, someone who believed me and supported me, made everything easier. The spring of 1973 brought changes to the community that I observed with great interest. Tara's daughter Star, now fully grown, had attracted the attention of a male from outside the group. I had never seen this individual before, and his arrival caused considerable excitement and some tension within the community. The males of the group were initially hostile, engaging in displays of dominance that involved impressive vocalizations and physical posturing. But the newcomer was persistent, returning day after day, bringing gifts of food that he left at the edge of the territory. Tara handled the situation with the diplomatic skill I had come to expect from her. She allowed the outsider to approach gradually, supervised interactions between him and Star, and mediated the conflicts that arose with the community's existing males. Over several weeks, a new equilibrium was established. The outsider, whom I came to call Rover because of his wandering origins, was accepted into the group. He and Star became a pair, spending increasing amounts of time together, and by summer it was clear that Star was pregnant with her first child. The birth took place in early autumn, and I was honored to be present for it. Tara came to the Hollow Oak one Thursday evening and made it clear through gestures that I should follow her. In the hidden valley, I found the community gathered around Star, who was in the final stages of labor. The atmosphere was one of tense anticipation, with the older females clustered close to offer support and guidance. I stayed at the edge of the group, not wanting to interfere, but grateful to witness such a momentous event. The baby was born as the sun was setting, a healthy female with her mother's coloring and her father's robust build. Star held her newborn with obvious pride, and the community gathered around to offer their congratulations in the form of gentle touches and soft vocalizations. Tara brought the new mother close to me, and Star made the gesture of introduction, showing me her daughter the way any proud mother would show off her baby. "What is her name?" I asked. Star made a sound, something that sounded like a combination of her own name and Rover's. A family name, perhaps, indicating the baby's lineage. I repeated it back as best I could, and Star made the contentment sound that I had learned to recognize as approval. "She is beautiful," I said. "Congratulations." Over the following months, I watched Star navigate the challenges of new motherhood with the support of her extended family. Kina was a frequent presence, offering advice and assistance based on her own experience with Luna. Even Konga, the old patriarch, seemed energized by the new addition to the community, spending hours watching over the baby while Star rested. It was a reminder of what family could mean, what community could accomplish when individuals supported each other through life's challenges. The winter of 1973 to 74 was milder than the previous years, and the community thrived. By spring, Luna was a confident and curious young child, exploring her world with boundless energy and getting into the kind of trouble that young ones of any species seem drawn to. She had developed a game she liked to play with me, hiding behind trees or rocks and jumping out to startle me when I walked by. Her gleeful sounds when I pretended to be scared were among the most joyful noises I had ever heard. One day in late spring, Luna presented me with a gift. It was a small carving, much cruder than the one Tara had given me years before, but recognizable nonetheless. A human figure with arms extended. Luna had made it herself, I realized, copying the art form she had seen the adults create. She had made a gift for me, just as her grandmother had done. "Thank you, Luna," I said, accepting the carving with appropriate solemnity. "I will keep this forever." Luna made a sound of satisfaction and then scampered off to find new mischief. I stood there holding her gift, marveling at what it represented. This creature, born of a species that humans barely believed existed, had learned to create art, to make gifts, to engage in the symbolic behavior that was supposed to be uniquely human. Luna was proof that intelligence, creativity, and emotional depth were not limited to our species. She was proof that the world held wonders beyond our narrow understanding. The summer of 1974 marked 21 years since my first encounter with Tara. I arrived at the Hollow Oak one Monday evening to find an unexpected gathering. The entire community was there, arranged in a loose semicircle around the ancient tree. Konga stood at the center, supported by two younger adults, his age clearly weighing heavily on him, but his dignity intact. Tara stood beside her father, and the rest of the community spread out behind them. It was clearly a formal occasion of some kind. As I approached, the community parted to let me through. Tara stepped forward and made the greeting gesture, then began a series of vocalizations that I could not understand, but that seemed to be addressing the group. When she finished, Konga stepped forward with obvious effort. He was old, older than any of the others, and every movement seemed to cost him, but his eyes were bright with intelligence and purpose. He approached me slowly, stopping when we were face to face. Then he reached out and placed both of his massive hands on my shoulders, a gesture I had never experienced before. He spoke, a series of sounds that resolved into something that sounded almost like words. El-Nor, friend, family. The words were not clear, not perfectly formed, but they were recognizable. In 21 years of interaction, this was the closest any of them had come to speaking my language, and he was not just speaking. He was declaring something, making an official pronouncement in front of the entire community. I was not just a friend, I was family. I did not know what to say. Tears were streaming down my face, and my throat was too tight for words. So I simply returned the gesture, placing my hands on his shoulders, looking into his ancient eyes, and nodding. "Thank you," I finally managed to whisper. "Thank you for accepting me. Thank you for trusting me. Thank you for letting me be part of your family." Konga made a sound of contentment, then turned and slowly made his way back to his place in the community. Tara stepped forward and took his place before me. She made a series of gestures, then reached into a natural pouch formed by the longer fur on her hip and withdrew an object wrapped in leaves. The object was a photograph, old, faded, water-damaged, but unmistakable. A photograph from the 1950s showing a group of forestry workers standing in front of a massive oak tree. And there, on the left side of the group, was a younger version of me, smiling at the camera with a survey notebook in my hand. I stared at it in shock. "Where did you get this?" Tara pointed at herself, then made a gesture I interpreted as long ago and watching. She had found this photograph somewhere, maybe blown from a truck, maybe left at an old survey camp, and she had kept it for years, maybe decades. She had kept it because she recognized me. She had been watching me, knowing who I was, long before I had ever known she existed. The implications were staggering. Our relationship had not begun in 1953 with my first food offering. It had begun earlier, with her observing me, learning about me, deciding I was someone who could be trusted. When I had left that first offering of food, she had already known what kind of person I was. "You have been watching over me," I said slowly, "as much as I have been watching over you." Tara's expression, if I was reading it correctly, seemed almost amused, as if to say, "Did you really think you were the only one paying attention all these years?" I laughed, a genuine surprised laugh that echoed through the clearing. All this time, I had thought I was being so careful, so observant. But they had been studying me just as closely, making their own assessments, building their own understanding of who I was and whether I could be trusted. "Thank you," I said, taking the photograph, "for trusting me, for letting me be part of your lives, for everything." Tara placed her hand on my shoulder, that familiar gesture that had come to mean so much. Then, she, and the rest of the community, turned and walked into the forest. Families heading home after a long day. I stood in the clearing for a long time after they had gone, the old photograph in my hands, thinking about everything that had happened since 1953. 21 years of Monday and Thursday visits, 21 years of quiet offerings and unspoken communication, 21 years of building something that had no name, no precedent, no guidebook. It was simply our relationship across species, across the divide between known and unknown, between civilization and wilderness, built on nothing more complicated than consistent kindness, mutual respect, and the recognition that we were all just trying to survive and protect the ones we loved. When I returned home that evening, Robert was waiting on the porch. I showed him the photograph, explained where it had come from, and watched his eyes fill with wonder. 21 years, he said softly. They have been watching you for 21 years, probably longer, I replied. This photo is from before I started feeding them. They chose me, Robert. I did not find them. They found me and decided I was worth trusting. Then I would say they are excellent judges of character. He squeezed my hand. Are you going to keep going? Monday and Thursday visits. I looked out at the darkening mountains, at the forest that had been my life's companion, at the wilderness that held secrets most people would never imagine. As long as they will have me, I said, as long as I am able to make the drive and walk that trail. They are family now. Strange, unusual family, but family nonetheless. And that is what I did. Through the rest of the 1970s and into the 1980s, I maintained my Monday and Thursday visits. I watched Luna grow into a strong, healthy young adult. I met new generations as they were born. I witnessed seasons change, years pass. Konga eventually died, passing peacefully one autumn night surrounded by his family. Tara mourned him deeply, as did the entire community. I was there for the funeral ceremony, watching as they laid him to rest in a manner that was both alien and profoundly familiar. They buried their dead with love and respect, just as we do. Robert accompanied me on a few visits in later years, staying at a distance, just watching and wondering. He never interacted directly with the community. That relationship remained mine alone. But he understood now why these trips meant so much to me, why this secret had shaped my life for so many years, and understanding, as it often does, brought us even closer together. The world outside the forest changed dramatically. Over the decades, I maintained my relationship with Tara and her people. Technology advanced, society transformed. The certainties of one generation gave way to the uncertainties of the next. But in that hidden valley in the heart of the Appalachian wilderness, life continued as it had for countless generations. Babies were born, young ones grew. The old passed on their wisdom and eventually passed away. The cycle continued, as eternal as the mountains themselves. I am an old woman now, past 80, and the hike up to the hollow oak has become difficult for me. Some visits, Robert has to drive me most of the way, and I have to rest several times on the trail. But I still go every Monday and Thursday, carrying my offerings of food, maintaining the relationship I began over 40 years ago. Tara is old too, moving with the careful deliberation of advanced age, her once vibrant reddish-brown fur now almost entirely gray. Luna is a grandmother herself, the leader of her own family group within the larger community. Star has raised several children and is now a respected elder. The community continues to thrive, its traditions intact, its way of life preserved in this sanctuary I have helped to protect. I do not know how much longer I will be able to make these visits. The body weakens even when the spirit remains strong. But I have made arrangements, careful preparations for the time when I can no longer come myself. My granddaughter Sarah has been told the truth, sworn to secrecy, and has agreed to continue the offerings when I am gone. She is a young woman of good character and deep respect for nature, and I believe she will honor the trust I have built. The relationship will continue, passed down through my family, just as Tara's leadership was passed down through hers. Some people spend their lives searching for proof of the extraordinary, for evidence that the world contains wonders beyond our everyday experience. They set up cameras, organize expeditions, write books arguing for the existence of creatures that most people dismiss as myth and legend. I understand their desire, the urge to prove what you know to be true, to share the wonder with others, to validate your own experience. But I learned long ago that some things are more important than proof. Some relationships are too precious to risk for the sake of recognition or validation. I have never told my story publicly, never sought fame or acknowledgement for what I have witnessed. This account, which I write now in my twilight years, is for my family alone, a record to be passed down with the responsibility of continuing the relationship I began. Perhaps someday the world will be ready to know that creatures like Tara and her people exist, that intelligence and emotion and family love are not unique to humanity. Perhaps someday their existence can be acknowledged and protected without putting them at risk. But that day is not today, and I will not be the one to force it. What I have learned in 40 years of friendship with these remarkable beings is simple but profound. The boundaries we draw between human and animal, between civilization and wilderness, between us and them, are not as solid as we imagine. Intelligence takes many forms. Love transcends species. Family is defined by bonds of care and loyalty, not by genetics or appearance. And sometimes, if you are very patient and very fortunate, you are granted the privilege of crossing those boundaries, of forming connections that enrich your life in ways you never could have anticipated. I am grateful for every Monday and Thursday visit, every offering left at the Hollow Oak, every moment of connection with Tara and her people. I'm grateful for the trust they extended to me, a stranger from another world, and for the family they allowed me to become part of. I'm grateful for the gift of knowing that the wilderness holds wonders, that the world is more remarkable than we imagine, that we are not alone in our capacity for love and grief and joy. My name is Eleanor Whitmore. I am 83 years old, and for the past 40 years, I have been feeding a family of extraordinary beings who most people believe exist only in legend and campfire tales. They are real, they are intelligent, they are compassionate, and they have been watching over these mountains and over us for far longer than anyone knows. This is my story. This is their story. This is our story together. The last time I saw Tara clearly was on a Thursday evening in early autumn. The leaves were just beginning to turn, hints of gold and crimson appearing on the highest ridges, and the air had that familiar crisp edge that told of winter approaching. I made my way slowly up the trail, resting often, feeling every one of my 83 years in my aching joints and laboring lungs. The pack on my shoulders, once so easy to carry, now felt like a tremendous burden. But I carried it anyway, as I had carried it for 4 decades, because some things are more important than physical comfort. She was waiting for me at the Hollow Oak, standing in the open without any attempt at concealment, her grey fur silver in the fading light. She was thin, I noticed, thinner than she had been. Age had caught up with her as it had caught up with me. We were both at the end of our journeys, she and I, 2 old women who had spent a lifetime building something extraordinary. I unpacked my offerings and arranged them in the hollow as I had done thousands of times before. Simple things: a jar of honey, some dried fruit, fresh bread baked that morning. The offerings had not changed much over the years, though the hands that prepared them had grown spotted and trembling with age. When I turned back, Tara had approached. She stood close enough to touch, her massive form towering over my stooped frame, her dark eyes meeting mine with the intelligence and awareness I had first recognized 40 years ago. Neither of us spoke. We had never needed many words between us. She reached out and placed her hand on my shoulder, that familiar gesture of connection. I placed my own hand over hers, marveling as always at the warmth, the solidity, the undeniable reality of her presence. We stood like that for a long moment, 2 old friends saying goodbye in the only way that mattered. Then she made a sound, low and gentle, and in it I heard everything: gratitude, love, understanding. Farewell. Thank you, I whispered, for everything. She turned then and walked into the forest, disappearing into the gathering darkness as she had done so many times before. But this time I knew was different. This time felt like an ending. I stood at the hollow oak for a long time after she was gone, watching the stars appear one by one in the darkening sky, listening to the night sounds of the forest I had loved all my life. Then I picked up my empty pack and began the long walk back down the mountain, back to Robert, who would be waiting with dinner on the table and questions in his eyes, back to the life I had built in the world of humans. But part of me stayed in that forest, as it always had. Part of me belonged to the mountains and the ancient trees and the remarkable beings who called them home. That part would never leave, no matter how far I traveled, no matter how many years passed. That part was home. Some stories do not have endings, not really. They simply continue in different forms, passed from one generation to the next, evolving and adapting, but never truly concluding. My story with Tara and her people is like that. It will not end when I die. Sarah will take my place, carrying offerings up the mountain, maintaining the relationship I built. And perhaps someday her children will continue the tradition, and their children after them. A chain of connection stretching forward into a future I will never see. I do not know what that future holds. Perhaps the world will become more hostile to these creatures, more dangerous. Perhaps development will encroach on their territory, forcing them to retreat to ever more remote locations. Or perhaps the world will change in ways that make their existence easier, that allow them to emerge from the shadows and take their rightful place as our neighbors, our fellow inhabitants of this remarkable planet. I do not know. I can only hope. But whatever happens, I know this. The relationship matters. The connection matters. The simple act of showing up week after week, year after year, decade after decade, with offerings and respect and the willingness to cross boundaries matters. It matters because it proves that different worlds can touch, that understanding is possible, that love transcends the categories we create to separate ourselves from each other and from the rest of creation. I am Eleanor Whitmore. I am 83 years old, and I have spent my life proving that the extraordinary is real, that the world is more wonderful than we imagine, and that sometimes, if you are very patient and very fortunate, you find family in the most unexpected places. This is my testament, this is my gift to those who come after me. May you carry it forward with wisdom and with love. The forest is quiet tonight, the stars are bright, and somewhere out there, in the deep wilderness, a family of remarkable beings is going about their lives, as they have for countless generations, as they will for generations to come. They are real, they are beautiful, and they are watching over us, whether we know it or not. My Monday and Thursday visits continue for as long as I am able, and when I am no longer able, they will continue through others. The relationship endures, the connection persists, the love remains. That is enough, that is everything. I think often about the nature of proof, about what it means to know something is real. Scientists demand physical evidence, repeatable experiments, data that can be measured and quantified. Skeptics insist on photographs, footprints, biological samples. Believers want confirmation of their hopes, validation of their faith. Everyone wants proof, wants certainty, wants to know beyond any doubt that what they believe is true. But I learned long ago that proof is not the same as truth. I have no photographs of Tara to show you, no footprints preserved in plaster, no hair samples analyzed in laboratories. I have only my testimony, my memories, my experience of 40 years of relationship with beings that most people believe do not exist. I cannot prove to you that they are real. I can only tell you that I know they are, as surely as I know my own name. What would proof accomplish anyway? If I had photographs, scientists would claim they were faked. If I had footprints, skeptics would argue they were manufactured. The world has seen supposed evidence of these creatures for decades, and it has changed nothing. The believers continue to believe, the skeptics continue to doubt. Proof has not settled the question and probably never will. But relationship is different from proof. Relationship does not require validation from others. It exists between two parties, private and personal, meaningful to those involved, regardless of what anyone else thinks. My relationship with Tara does not depend on whether you believe me. It exists in its own right, complete and whole, whether anyone acknowledges it or not. Perhaps that is the lesson I want to leave behind for Sarah and for anyone else who reads these words. Truth is not found in evidence presented to skeptics. Truth is found in relationship, in connection, in the patient accumulation of moments shared with another being. Truth is found in showing up week after week, year after year, with nothing to offer but yourself and your willingness to care. I showed up for 40 years, and in return, I was given the gift of knowing something true about the world, something wonderful and strange and profound. That gift cannot be measured or photographed or proven, but it is real. It is the most real thing in my life. The autumn deepens, the leaves fall, the nights grow long and cold. I make my preparations for winter, as I have done for 83 years, knowing that this winter may be my last. Robert and I sit by the fire in the evenings, holding hands, talking about our children and grandchildren, remembering the long life we have shared together. He knows what I know now. He understands what I have been doing all these years, and he loves me for it. Loves me more perhaps than he would have if I had been an ordinary woman leading an ordinary life. Sarah came to visit last week. She is ready, I think, ready to take on the responsibility I will leave her. I took her up the mountain one final time, showing her the trail, explaining the patterns, sharing the accumulated wisdom of 4 decades. She listened with the serious attention of someone who understands the weight of what she is receiving. She will be good at this, I believe. She has the patience, the respect, the quiet determination that this work requires. We did not see anyone from the community during that visit, but the offerings I had left the week before were gone, and fresh tracks circled the hollow oak. They are still there. They are still watching. They will accept Sarah when the time comes, just as they accepted me all those years ago. I am certain of it. Tonight, I will write the final pages of this account, the story I have been telling for weeks now, putting down in words the experiences that have defined my life. Tomorrow, I will seal it in an envelope, label it with Sarah's name, and place it in the locked box in my workshop where I have kept my journal all these years. She will find it when I am gone, along with the journal itself, the small carved figure Tara gave me, the photograph that proved they had been watching me since before I knew they existed, and Luna's crude little carving that remains one of my most treasured possessions. These things are not proof. They are tokens, mementos, physical reminders of a relationship that exists beyond the physical. They will help Sarah understand what she is inheriting, what responsibility she is taking on. They will connect her to the history I have built, help her continue what I have started. The fire burns low. Robert has fallen asleep in his chair, his hand still loosely holding mine. Outside, the wind whispers through the bare branches of the trees, carrying hints of snow from the mountains above. It is a peaceful night, a good night for endings and beginnings. I think about Tara, somewhere in the deep forest, resting with her family around her. Is she thinking of me too? This old woman who has been bringing food to her people for 40 years, does she wonder, as I wonder, what will happen when one of us is finally gone? Does she feel the same mix of gratitude and grief and love that I feel, this bittersweet awareness that everything beautiful must eventually end? I choose to believe she does. I choose to believe that our connection transcends the obvious differences between us, that she feels what I feel, knows what I know, loves as I love. I have no proof of this. I have only faith, the faith that comes from 40 years of relationship, of patient building, of small acts of kindness accumulated over thousands of visits. Faith is not proof, but sometimes faith is enough. My name is Eleanor Whitmore. I am 83 years old. Tomorrow, I will make my Monday visit to the Hollow Oak, carrying my offerings as I have carried them for 40 years. Walking the trail I have walked since I was young and strong, and the world seemed full of possibilities. I will leave my gifts in the hollow of the ancient tree, look around at the forest I have loved all my life, and remember. I will remember the first time I saw Tara, crouched over the deer carcass with her children beside her. I will remember the long years of patient building, the slow accumulation of trust. I will remember Luna's illness, the crisis that brought us closer than we had ever been. I will remember Konga's declaration, the moment when I became family. I will remember, and I will be grateful. Grateful for the privilege of knowing something true about the world. Grateful for the relationship that has defined my life. Grateful for the love that transcends species, transcends understanding, transcends proof. And then I will turn and walk back down the mountain, back to Robert, back to the life I have built in the world of humans. And next Thursday, I will do it again. And the Monday after that, and the Thursday after that. For as long as I am able, I will continue. Because some things are more important than rest, more important than comfort, more important than the limitations of an aging body. Some things are worth showing up for, no matter what. This is my testament. This is my truth. This is my gift to those who will come after. May you find your own forest. May you find your own Tara. May you find the patience and the courage to build something extraordinary across the boundaries that divide us. The world is more wonderful than we imagine. Never forget that. Never forget.